Jim Thrift, agricultural consultant. Welcome back to the show, Jim.
Franklin, always great to be here, and this is a great topic. I love this.
So what's the scoop with GMOs?
Well, let's back up just a minute, and before we get to GMOs, let's talk about food safety and why there seems to be some question of it. Why there's so many vegetarians, or even more troubling yet, vegans, which are really interesting. First of all, Greenpeace, NRDC, and a variety of people are stirring the pot and making Americans concerned about food safety. They're telling people that you can't trust the government. In some cases, they are correct. In this one, in reality, it depends on the brand. GMOs and food safety are really governed by both EPA and FDA, with a final review by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So a lot of it isn't just GMOs. Frankly, what it is a question of food safety and labeling. The big issue right now at the EPA is, what do we do with terms like natural, healthy, organic? And as simple as organic sounds, it really depends which definition you're using. So, Franklin, I am not at all surprised that your listeners are confused, because in this area, I know quite a bit, and I get a little confused sometimes.
Well, can you take us to a product that we can all be familiar with so we can have a concrete example? Let's say it's something we all like, peanut butter. Almost everybody likes peanut butter. In fact, Winston Churchill liked peanut butter so much that he's responsible for almost every grand hotel in the world presently stocking it, because his mother, as you know, was an American, and he really single-handedly introduced peanut butter to England. So let's look at peanut butter, because we all love Winston Churchill and for other reasons. Let's say it says organic. What does that mean? Does that mean the farm is organic or the peanuts are?
I love your example of Winston Churchill and peanut butter. My example is far less institutionalized, educational. It's Elvis Presley. His favorite sandwich was peanut butter and bananas. Hey, don't ask me. I never tried it, but I guess it's okay. I'll tell you something that's a great example for GMOs, however, is corn. Corn oil and soybean oil are in 1,100 out of about 1,700 items in the average grocery store. Peanut oil is in only about 100, maybe. It's not commonly used. The only time peanut oil is used in processing is when something has to be heated to an extremely high temperature, and then they use peanut oil, which doesn't burn to a high temperature. But the issue with GMOs is they're widespread in our food supply. And we get into things like organic that you just mentioned. And, you know, my question always is, when somebody says I eat organic food, is which definition are you using? United States Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Organic League, the Organic Advisory Board, or some of your friends' definition of organic? The nomenclature is confusing. Like I mentioned, things like natural, farm-raised. What do those terms mean? Frankly, I'm not sure what organic means. It depends on whose definition you're using.
Well, let's look at a moment. If I drive out of Chicago very shortly, I see some beautiful farm country. And in the right season, those corn rows have sometimes signs on them that you see. And they say Pioneer 7125 or something like that. What do those signs mean? Is that hybridization or genetic modification? And how can we draw a line between that moment and when we buy a corn product, which I guess is almost anything, in our supermarket?
Well, first of all, Franklin, I'm glad to see that you're able to drive. I didn't know that people on parole with an ankle bracelet were allowed to do that. But notwithstanding that, since you're driving in the Chicago suburbs, which I think is a good area to get out of, and you do go south in Illinois, which is some of the richest farmland in the world, those signs you see are seed signs: Pioneer, DeKalb, Asgrow, and they give you variety. They're really designed for other farmers to look at it and go, wow, that looks like a really good seed variety. I ought to spend some of my money buying that. They will also tell you, if you look up the codes, which ones are genetically modified and which ones aren't. But today, 90% or over of all the soybeans produced in the United States are GMO. 85% of the cotton is GMO, and about 75% of all the corn produced, including sweet corn, is GMO. It's a modern scientific breakthrough to help feed the world, brought to you by a variety of companies, including Dow, DuPont, and Monsanto. And so it is a major breakthrough in agricultural economics and agronomy, and most of those signs, if you trace them back, would in fact be GMO corn seed.
Jim, I remember learning in my very fancy undergraduate years, in which I took a completely useless degree, which has served me not at all, about this fellow named about this fellow named Malthus. Evidently, at the turn of the century, this fellow named Malthus did some extrapolating and figured out that in a very short amount of time, there'd be no food left on Earth, and we couldn't possibly produce enough food. Now, I mention this because I was thinking of him when I was reading the Chicago Tribune the other day, because they said the same thing, that denialism, genetic modification, we don't, in essence, here we go. As the WRI paper points out, farmers need to close a 69% gap between the crops they produced in 2006 and the food the world will need given population growth by 2050. I read that and I thought, that sounds very Malthusian. And of course, Malthus turned out to be totally wrong. Tell us the truth, Jim. Are we producing enough food for the people on the earth? And what does this have to do with GMOs and hybridization and all that stuff?
Well, anytime there's a statistic, they're using today's science. And it actually was widely forecast around 2000, could have been 2006, that the world's population would go from about 6.3 billion to about 9 billion by 2050. And that's been the target, 2050, just like you brought up. I'm impressed with your statistics. They seem to be remarkably accurate, because most of what I hear on the air, and especially coming out of D.C., is not accurate. That statistic is accurate.
Jim, it's very important to remember that 16.25% of statistics are made up on the spot.
Well, frankly, I agree with you, and frankly, I operate by the principles that if you always tell people the truth, they're more active to believe in you when you lie to them. So I think statistics are extremely useful in this type of thing. Besides, nobody knows anything, but I love your 16.25. I've written that down. But the only way we're going to get to the food supply that we need in 2050, and in order to avoid world pestilence, we're going to have to use new agricultural techniques and new cropland. The United States is pretty much tapped out at about 386 million acres totally, but areas in Indonesia and China are expanding with new irrigation practices. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of people hungry at dinner time, and hungry people tend to pick up clubs and rifles and riot, and that doesn't help world stability any. So you're right. If we don't use modern science, we won't be able to meet the food supply. Now, it's unfortunate that my vegan and vegetarian friends believe that we should actually curtail the use of chemicals, and my answer to them is, you have a choice. You can eat what you want, but don't deny what other people want to eat.
So you bring up a very interesting point, Jim Thrift, that the anti-GM movement and their ability, as we know, to affect for instance, foreign aid, food policy, might be keeping hungry people from eating.
You are exactly right. It's some of my friends that adopt non-central policies or positions, which could be political or social, feel that they have to persuade me to agree with them. I don't feel that's correct. if you want to eat certain things and you only want to have free-range chickens, that's fine with me. Go to the store and buy free-range chickens. Don't convince me that I should. I prefer chickens that were not free-range because free-range chickens are eating gravel in your driveway and junk. I would rather have chickens that are sitting around doing nothing but listening to the web and watching chicken TV and having a very nice diet where their legs are not all built up with muscles like you would have in a free-range chicken. So, if you
Jim
want
Thrift, by the way, Jim, we've got to go, but I want to make sure I thank you from the bottom of my heart. It is always a delight and always very informative and fun to have you on. Jim Thrift, agricultural consultant to 1590 WCGO. This is the Franklin Raff Show.